Mhm. Okay, let's get going. The minute hand on my clock is vertical. For those of you who are not familiar with that device, it's something we used to use instead of digits. And it's time to begin our second keynote talk, also featuring artificial intelligence. Our speaker today is Frank Wattenberger. And I want to say just retiree or emeritus, but I'm going to say much appreciated retiree from the U.S. Military Academy, among other places in his career, including Texas Instrument and the National Science Foundation and other schools out west. So Frank is going to be talking to us about artificial intelligence, and get ready because this is energy. Frank?
Super. Well, I want to begin by saying thanks and kudos to Brian Winkle and the entire Semio team. This is an amazing conference. The content is great and it's running incredibly smoothly. It's really difficult to pull this off, and I really want to say thank you. And basically, the Semio community, and this is an absolutely wonderful community. It's been really cool to reconnect with some people that I haven't talked with in a long time, and it's been really cool to meet some new people. So I really want to thank everybody for that. I particularly want to thank Don for a wonderful keynote yesterday. He inspired me, and in part, an inspiration, I got up this morning with all sorts of things I wanted to try and use DALL-E for in ChatGPT. So I realized that probably the most important thing to convey to everybody is the speed with which artificial intelligence, in particular large language models and generative pre-trained transformer architecture, which we're going to talk more about later, the speed with which that's moving. And I wanted to have an image that would convey that. And there was no way I could do that in this morning before the talk. But inspired by Don, I said, hey, I'm going to use ChatGPT and through ChatGPT DALL-E to do that. So here's the prompt that I gave it. And you can see that on your screen. Says, I want to create an image that conveys two things about ChatGPT. First, the fact that it's moving very quickly. And second, the fact that it's very nimble and agile. So I'd like the word ChatGPT to be on the side of a sports car. Sports car is moving at high speed so that the car and the word are blurred by the motion, but you can still make out the word. I'd like the car to be moving along a road with a university building in the background. So when I think about that, that gives me a very good image. And before I put the next slide up, I'd like you to take 30 seconds and think about what image a human artist might create. So my guess is you've actually seen lots of pictures like that. It's almost a cliche. So let's see how ChatGPT did. So that's its first try, and it's really, really bad. It completely misunderstood it. It's got the background blurred. The car is actually still. Notice it made some mistakes in the lettering on the side. It's terrible. So let's look at the next thing. Oh, this one's even worse. Now the car is driving, it's at right angles. And here's another one. I tried to give it some clues. I said, think about this as if a camera was on a tripod, and it insisted on putting the camera in the picture. And it's just a terrible picture. If you look at the picture, the lighting is all wrong. Look at the shadow of the tripod, compare that with the shadow of the car. Again, it can't seem to even spell its own name correctly. Really, really bad. And here's the final one. I'll let you think about that. So I guess the message I got from this is that ChatGPT is not terribly good at creating this kind of imagery. I thought it would be a lot better. So one of my favorite commentators is Tom Friedman. And the reason he's my favorite commentator is about 75% of the time, I really agree with what he's saying. More importantly, though, about 25% of the time, he makes me spitting mad and he challenges my thinking. And that's good. The purpose of listening to other people is to be challenged. And this talk is going to be in that spirit. So I'm going to say a lot of things that are very controversial and even somewhat impolite. And I'll give you an example. Don gave an example yesterday of using ChatGPT to design a new course. And I think that is not a very good use of ChatGPT. In fact, I think we'll agree that it's not going to put any of us who've written textbooks or designed courses out of the business. I think if you look very closely at what ChatGPT produced, you'll find that it's really not very good, very, very poor answers. And my hope is that today, by looking at some of the ideas and the math underlying ChatGPT, we're going to understand more about its potential, its upside, and its shortcomings. So in that spirit, I gave DALL-E, again through ChatGPT. So there are a lot of things in common with the technology underlying DALL-E and the technology underlying ChatGPT. So I gave DALL-E one more chance to create an image for this talk this morning. I have to mention parenthetically that one of the things I really like about ChatGPT is it's really forgiving about my typos. So if you'll notice, I asked it to create an image showing the speaker one on a smoke box. Of course, I meant on, and that didn't throw ChatGPT off at all. So what I asked it to do was I wanted to convey this idea of a speaker that's controversial. So I wanted a speaker on a soapbox with 4 people listening. And what I wanted was that the 4 people were identical quadruplets. I was trying to get the same person produced 4 times, and this was my way to do it. I wanted 3 of those people, because I just mentioned that I agree with Tom Friedman 75% of the time. I wanted 3 of those people to be cheering and happy, visibly applauding, and the 4th one should be visibly angry. That's the 25% of the time that Tom Friedman makes me spitting angry. So ChatGPT and DALL-E responded right away. It says the image has been created, showing a speaker on a soapbox with an audience, et cetera, et cetera. 3 of them are visibly happy, and so on, capturing a moment of diverse reactions within a uniform group. So it really sounds like ChatGPT understood what I was getting at. Here's the image. It's really weird. Notice one of the key elements is the angry person. Can you even find the angry person in that image? Well, if you look kind of in the back row, there are a couple of disembodied fists up in the air, and that apparently is the angry person. Somehow or the quadruplets, everybody in there looks identical, and including the speaker. So I'm going to let you decide how useful you think DALL-E has been in this situation. So this is the first of a whole bunch of slides I'm going to do. Well, not several slides I'm going to do that start out with generalities about artificial intelligence. They're going to be followed by far more slides that are very specific to artificial intelligence at the differential equations level, both for mathematics and for teaching courses at that level. So I'm actually leading with this slide in all the talks I'm giving now. And the reason I'm leading with this slide is I think at this moment of time, we need the full power of the arts, the humanities, and the sciences to solve the problems we're facing. So the most important thing I hope everybody will take away from this when they go back to your institutions, when you turn your computer off tomorrow, is to advise your students to take courses in the humanities and the arts, as well as STEM, and to advocate for increased funding and attention to the arts and humanities at your home institutions. We really need the arts and we really need the humanities if we're going to solve the problems that we're facing. The reason we need the arts is that a lot of the problems we're facing require deep cross-cultural understanding and empathy. And that's the province of the arts, to really convey that kind of gut level visceral understanding of other people and so on. So we really need the arts and we need the humanities for values. We often talk about modeling and we kind of compartmentalize modeling in the science part of it to inform what we're doing. But in fact, we need to model how we make decisions in these high stakes public policy and personal policy situations where you're not trying to optimize one thing, you're trying to optimize 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 different things, and they're often competing. And we need the humanities when we've got values that are competing objective functions. So that's the reason I put this slide up. So here's another thing ChatGPT did. So back in June, when we were first talking about these keynotes, I was much, much more enthusiastic about artificial intelligence and its upside potential than I am now. In fact, I was really pretty amused by it. So my original theme for this talk was a partnership between human and artificial intelligence. And this image was created by that partnership. And it shows the potential and the humor of AI. So again, this is an early DALL-E image. And again, you can kind of look at it and kind of laugh. It's not very good at spelling. I asked it to create an image showing a bowling ball labeled artificial intelligence crashing into a bunch of bowling pins and upsetting everything. And I worked really hard to get it to produce something that I thought was pretty good. It's I would say humorous. So back at that time, so again, let me emphasize that ChatGPT is evolving very, very quickly. So this is from back in June when we were first looking at this. And one of my favorite conversations with it at that time, I asked it to write 3 histories of the 2020 election as the 2020 election in the United States presidential election might have been described by Donald Trump, by Joe Biden, and by writers for the Hallmark Channel. It can't do that anymore. It's got too many guardrails in place. It won't let you do that. But what it did was really hilarious. So this is what ChatGPT came up with. A history of the presidential election in the United States 2020 in the style of a Hallmark Channel. So I'm going to read that quickly. On election day, Joe and Donald waited anxiously for the results to come in. As the votes were counted, it became clear that Joe had won a resounding victory, receiving more than 81 million votes and 306 electoral votes. Donald, who received more than 74 million votes and 232 electoral votes, graciously conceded, and he pledged to support Joe as the next president. Joe and Donald embraced, and they shared a heartfelt conversation about the future of the country. They both recognized that despite their differences, they both loved America and wanted what was best for its people. The 2020 election was a triumphant tale of the power of the American people to choose their own destiny. It's a story of hope, resilience, and an enduring strength of the American spirit. So there's a lot of talk in the United States right now about some kind of a third-party ticket. And my candidate is the Hallmark Channel team. So in the 8 months since Brian asked me to do this keynote, a lot has happened. And the key thing is it builds on long-term trends. So I want to visualize that by looking at this graph. Many of you have seen this before. This is the record of atmospheric carbon dioxide at Mauna Loa, taken by Keeling, starting in, I guess, 1954, if I remember correctly. So the reason I'm putting this slide up is it really illustrates how what we're seeing now is a result of long-term trends, how it's accelerated and impacted by STEM. So, for example, right around 1950, I guess it's 1954, you'll see that you begin to see what's actually an annual cycle. And that's basically because that's when Keeling started collecting his data. And we have very good day-by-day data, and you can actually see the seasonal variation that's due to the fact that you've got all these boreal forests in the northern hemisphere. And that in the spring is when they're actively taking carbon dioxide out and putting oxygen in. Before that, the data is based on things like sediment data and tree ring data and stuff like that. So they're data problems. What's really interesting here is you can really see that, kind of starting in the beginning when we had the Industrial Revolution, you begin to see that carbon dioxide rising. And then it's rising very, very rapidly starting in, well, kind of in the 1950s. So we can really see the relationship between STEM, the technology involved in things like fracking and extracting oil and gas from the ground is truly extraordinary. But that technology can be used to make our world better, or it can make our world worse. And the same thing can be said about artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence is accelerating four long-term trends. The first one is plagiarism. For a long time, plagiarism has been a problem. Artificial intelligence, and I'm speaking particularly about things like ChatGPT, encourage plagiarism, and it almost makes it unavoidable. The second problem is a problem of provenance. When you look at something, you really want to know where it came from. That's important for lots of reasons, how trustworthy the data is, for example. And tracking provenance in something produced by ChatGPT is basically impossible. Artistic integrity. So artists often talk about the fact that their works are complete. They've done them the way they want them to be presented. And the problem with all this modification that's being done is it destroys the integrity of the art. That's true in science as well. If you produce a textbook or a talk, you put a lot of work into it. You want that to appear the way it is, and you don't want somebody else messing that up. In addition, if you use artificial intelligence to produce something, it often changes what you mean. I mean, if you looked at the images we looked at earlier, I was trying to create a certain message, and ChatGPT was not doing very well. The biggest problem is explainability. So the most important thing when we're modeling is being able to explain what's going on. And it's very, very difficult to explain what's going on behind the scenes. So we're going to talk an awful lot about that. And one of the things we want to do is we'll talk about kind of how the mathematics underlying ChatGPT makes this really difficult. So, of course, another thing that happened since June 2023 is all the stuff that's going on in the Middle East, continued destruction and carnage in Ukraine, the complete breakdown of the body politic in the United States and elsewhere, and there's this crescendo of mis and disinformation now powered by artificial intelligence. So we really desperately need to understand artificial intelligence and how to use it to make our world better, not worse. So I'm going to put this slide up again because it's the single most important thing I hope you all take away from this, which is to go back to your home institutions and really boost the arts and humanities. We desperately need them. So this in 10 words is everything you need to know about artificial intelligence. Large language models and George Santos both pass the Turing test. They both create the illusion of intelligence, and it is an illusion. And it's important, they're both products of the training data. And the training data for artificial intelligence includes an awful lot of amplified and repeated George Santoses. So now I want to come down from these kind of very general questions to what we can do in our roles as differential equations levels mathematicians and mathematics educators. So this is an awesome start. Semiode and this book by Kurt Bryan are absolutely terrific. This is a group that I think can make a huge contribution to helping us use artificial intelligence well. The big thing is that our center is modeling. The center of our interest is model, our raison d'etre is modeling, and we need to change what and how we teach. We really have to put modeling even more center than it is now. And by modeling, I mean understanding. The purpose of modeling is to build our own human understanding of our world. So first, fairly controversial statement, I think we need far less algebra, and I'm going to elaborate that on later. I think we want to concentrate much more on modeling, building models, and so on. So the essence of this talk is two synergies. And this is the slide that's up now talks about a book by Daniel Kahneman called Thinking Fast and Slow. He makes a distinction between two kinds of thinking. On one side, you have what he calls fast thinking. It's unconscious. You're not aware of the fact that you're thinking fast. It's highly parallel. Lots of things going on in your head at the same time. It's very broadly based. It's going out and it's searching everywhere. When you look at a picture, a lot of fast thinking going on, you're looking at all parts of the picture at the same time. It's instinctive. We don't think about it. It's informal. You're not doing fast thinking with equations or words. It's very difficult to explain because it's happening under your consciousness. In the computer science world, the closest term is learning. Fast thinking is what happens, what develops by a process of learning. On the other hand, slow thinking is conscious. It's linear instead of being highly parallel. When I'm talking with a stream of words. It's focused. Instead of being broadly based, it's got a very narrow focus. It's rational. Often it's mathematical. It's logical. And the computer science term that's closest to this is design. So the essence of this talk is two synergies, a synergy between fast and slow thinking, and a synergy between artificial intelligence and human intelligence. And the superficial reading of Kahneman's book is a story of fast thinking moderated and held in check by slow thinking. So the idea is you're in a situation and you instinctively think something and you might be wrong, and you're being held in check by more rational, slower thinking. But what I want to emphasize is the collaboration between the two. We really need both of them. And artificial intelligence does use both. A really good example is modern smart photography. If you've got a good cell phone camera right now or a good camera, when you take a picture, it actually uses something sort of like ChatGPT under the hood. It can recognize people in your favorites pictures. It can recognize birds and planes. It can recognize all sorts of things. And it does that with fast thinking. It recognizes elements of the picture or the scene in front of you that might be important. And then it uses slow thinking, this more algorithmic thinking, to say, there's a bird and it's flying, and I'm going to predict where it's going to be when the shutter goes off. So modern artificial intelligence uses both. It's a combination of fast and slow thinking. So if you happen to have 3D glasses, this is a great demonstration of fast thinking. If you put them on and you close one eye, you'll just see one scene. You close the other eye, you see another scene. And instantly, if you open both eyes, you're going to see a three-dimensional picture. So what happens is you can do the same thing if you blink one eye and blink the other eye. What happens when you look at things with two eyes is your brain, your fast thinking, instantly constructs a three-dimensional model. We're never aware of that. So if you ask people what organs they use for seeing, they'll almost always say your eyes, but your brain with its fast thinking is a big part of it. Our time is short. And if it wasn't so short, I would highly recommend, I would spend a lot of time on this. This is a really good article. I recommend reading an article in Forums called "The Best Way to Control Today's Artificial Intelligence." What's interesting is that modern AI is increasingly using learning to control itself. And this is really, really interesting. If you look at one article after this, I highly recommend this one. So I'm going to make an awful lot of an analogy between artificial and human intelligence. This is really controversial. I suspect if there's any computer scientists in the group or artificial intelligence people, several of them are jumping up and down, shaking their hands. I think it's a very controversial analogy, but my own take on it is it's inevitable. I think it's maybe as useful for understanding human intelligence as it is for understanding artificial intelligence. I think it means we may be able to use AI as a laboratory for learning about learning, for learning about communication, and even for learning about intelligence. Okay, so now I'm going to start looking at the mathematics of it. And this is another good article. I recommend it. It's a good starting point, doesn't go terribly far. The key thing underlying our discussion is this whole idea of modeling. And modeling is the interplay between two things, our real world and our mental models. On the left, you see this, our real world, and I'm looking here at the seasons. I can see fall foliage, I can see different shadows. On the right, I'm looking at a globe, which is a model, a physical model that's trying to explain the seasons. And modeling goes back and forth between the two. So one of the limitations that people often cite for artificial intelligence is its inability to perform experiments. Interestingly, there are some domains where it can perform experiments. Companies like Google and Amazon have a tremendous amount of data, and they actually are able to tailor their user interfaces to maximize profit. And they can do experiments, and they do experiments. And their goal, of course, is increasing profits, and they're really, really good at it. So it's interesting. Okay, so here's what I think we should be doing with the SIR model. So I think the differential equations themselves are interesting, but their solutions are only a small part of the story. So what's really important is building SIR models. So we start out with a reasonable first model. This was designed to work with the COVID-19 pandemic. So this is a fairly simple model, slightly more complicated model. And now this one's getting much more interesting. And what we want to do is spend our time talking about building these models. And as soon as you start building these models, you realize how important certain things are. So one of the key things, of course, is the rate of recovery. And I'm going to look at another slide. This is a great slide to use. This is data that shows essentially the case fatality rate. And it talks about how difficult it is to measure that. And it also shows you that it's a parameter that changes rapidly. So if you notice between March 14th, 2020 and February 21st, 2021, that those parameters have changed a lot. There's a lot of difference in different countries. So this is the kind of thing we really need to talk about. So I want to give an example of what I mean when I say less algebra and more understanding. So I asked ChatGPT to give me some ideas for how I might help students understand resonance. So it's an example of resonance. And I told, and this is true, when I studied differential equations, we used the method of undetermined coefficients and introduced extra terms. And this explanation, blah, 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 is there a better and more way to understand resonance? And ChatGPT and virtually every differential equations book out there, including the simulated course, do something like this. Very, very, very algebraic. Oh, incidentally, yesterday somebody asked the question of whether you could put formulas in ChatGPT, and you can. You basically use tech notation, and it gives you formulas out using tech notation. Okay, so here is a better analysis, which I claim gives you real understanding, and it's far more general. So it's based on 3 ideas. The first idea is that if you start out with everything at rest, and you have an initial velocity and position, this thing rotates, and this thing oscillates. And I put this up, it's some algebra. You really don't even need the algebra at all. All you need to know is that in the absence of friction or resistance with no external forcing, the system is going to oscillate periodically with no change in amplitude. So that's the first key idea. Here's the second key idea. It's linearity and superposition. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a periodic forcing term, and that's what you see up at the top. And we're going to break it down into individual forcing terms, one for each period. And we're going to solve the differential equation, the initial value problem, by solving each of the individual forcing term ones and then adding them up. So this is, key idea, really important, very simple. So we'll start with just the first period of forcing, and you can see what happens. The system starts at rest, and from time 0 until time 0, nothing's happening, it's just sitting there. Then the first forcing term causes it to start to move, and through that first period, you see it's moving. After one period, that forcing term turns off, and from there on, it's just oscillating. That's what we said before. It's oscillating, the amplitude isn't changing, it's just oscillating. So that's the second. Third key idea is autonomous and time shift. So now I want to compare what I did before with what happens with the second forcing term. So the first forcing term is in gray, the second one is in red. The red one's absolutely identical with the gray one, except it's shifted. And you see exactly the same thing. The only difference is a shift. So what I'm looking at now is on the top, on the bottom, the result of the first forcing term. Okay, you can see it starts moving during the first period, and then it just oscillates. Then next to the bottom, you see the result of the second forcing term. Oscillates for that first period during the period when the forcing is on, and then it just oscillates. And then you see the result of the third one, and the fourth one, and the fifth one. So now we can see exactly why you get linear growth. When I add these up for the first period, all I just have is this motion from that first forcing term. For the second period, I've got the oscillation from the first forcing term, plus this little bit of motion from the second forcing term. Third period, I've got 2 oscillations from the first 2 forcing terms, and then that motion from the third one, and so on. Each period, I'm going to add 1 more oscillation. So it's clear why you've got amplitude growing linearly. Much more general. And it shows you why it's growing linearly. So this is my example of how the algebra actually gets in the way of understanding what's going on. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to focus on 2 of the mathematical ideas underlying large language models: word vectors and transform architecture. And we only have time for 2 of them. So the first question is, how can we model or represent words? So we speak in words, and we need some kind of model for what those words are. So the next 5 slides jump to the punchline, and let's see what comes out of this idea of word vectors. So I asked ChatGPT to give me a list of 5 current football players and people who bear the same relationship to them as Tony Reginelli does to Peyton Manning, and to explain its reasoning. I just, in passing, noticed that ChatGPT had no problem figuring out that I meant American football. And look what it did. It said Tony Reginelli was Peyton Manning's high school football coach, a key figure, so on and so on. And it gave me a list of some people that were similar to that, okay? Then I said, that's perfect. What I'd like to do is explore the same idea, noting people who played the same formative roles in the development of Donald Trump and of Joe Biden. Please list some of the influential mentors in each of their lives. And this is a really, apparently quite intelligent answer, I think. And in Joe Biden's life. Again, really, really interesting. So this is fast thinking at its best. It's going out, it's looking for relationships. It shows you the role of vectors, how it was able to talk not just about things, but their relationship to each other. Can you add people who each of Donald Trump and Joe Biden might not have known personally, but whose lives their writings served to help shape them? Again, this is a pretty good answer. It's really interesting. And for Joe Biden. So now we've seen the power of representing words as vectors. And what I want to do now is look at what word vectors are. So first thing I have to talk about what a word is. And you think of it as a text segment. I might mention parenthetically that if we were looking at images, it might be a feature in an image. In text, it might be part of an English word, or it might be several English words. For example, the English word unbelievable actually begins with 3 words, un plus believe plus able. And the 2 English words New and York might be combined into a single word. So the idea is that we represent the semantic meaning of words as vectors for 2 reasons. First of all, they're multidimensional. And secondly, we can manipulate vectors the same way we manipulate other vectors. We can add, subtract, we can ask about the difference between them. Each occurrence of a word in text is represented by its own word vector. As intelligence, either human or machine, attempts to understand the text, both the words and the vectors that represent them change. So we're going to see that as ChatGPT works on trying to understand something, it's actually changing the vectors. And this is really important. Most dimensions are hidden. So we really don't know what's going on underneath the hood. And I would argue that's true for us as well, that most of the associations we have for words are not associations that we're necessarily aware of. So this is really important. So this goes back to Google's key word-to-vector project, which was in 2013, underlies the first step in the vector representation of words. So it began with this large corpus of text, huge, and it built vector representation of words by looking at things like how often words appear in the same text and the context of each appearance. So the next step is this generalized pre-trained transformer architecture. We're going to talk about that later, but that's beginning. The initial vectors representing words are not produced by somebody sitting down and saying, well, an uncle is the brother of this person and the male and things like that. This is all done by learning. So again, we often ask students to do something like compare and contrast, and look at what ChatGPT can do doing that. So I asked it to talk about the relationship between Tony Reginelli and Peyton Manning, and the relationship between Mike Mansfield and Joe Biden. And I asked it to explain the answer and discuss how word vectors played a role. And it says that you can often ask students to compare and contrast, and it's doing a pretty good job of that. And it's all because of these underlying word vectors. One of the things that's really important is the dot product. And the dot product is something we've been using for a long time in data analysis to talk about things like the correlation between two different data sets and so on. And it's using basically the same idea. So in our courses at the DE level, we really want to stress things like the dot product and how they're using it. So I want to return to this interplay between fast and slow thinking. And I want to use that to help us understand AI, the training of artificial intelligence, and perhaps to understand ourselves. So a really good place to look is jury trials. So if you've served on a jury recently, either a civil or a criminal trial, the judge almost certainly gave you instructions about unconscious bias. And it's based in large part on the work of Daniel Kahneman on fast thinking. So what they're thinking is that unconscious bias is a result of this under the hood fast thinking, the kinds of prejudices and discrimination that is happening underneath the hood and that we may not be aware of. The instructions I was given to the jury were actually somewhat contradictory. On the one hand, we were cautioned to avoid judgments based on stereotypes. So keep your fast thinking in control. On the other hand, we were told to make decisions about witnesses' credibility using our common sense in the same ways we do in everyday life. That sounds an awful lot like fast thinking to me. So we really need to understand fast and slow thinking. And this is one domain that's a really interesting place to look. There's a lot of work that's been done on that. Okay, now, usually when people quote the National Academy of Science and a bunch of Nobel Prize winners, it's because they want to associate themselves with that and hope that that lends credibility to what they're saying. I'm going to do exactly the opposite. I'm going to use this as an example of why I think Nobel Prize winners in the National Academy of Science, sometimes they're way off base. And I submit that our understanding of artificial intelligence can help us understand the public's lack of trust in science and scientists. So this was a meeting held May 24th, 26th in 2023. And it was a summit on countering misinformation and building trust in science. And what I want to do is I want to use what we know about human intelligence and artificial intelligence and compare them to kind of look at this problem. So I think we can learn more about the mistrust of science by understanding how large language models and people fast learn about the word scientist or doctor. So one of the reasons this is so urgent right now is mistrust related to COVID-19. This is the paragraph I put up before about Google's word to vector process. And what I want to do is think about what the training data for the word doctor, what that would lead us to think about doctors. So for most people, the training data for the word doctor includes their own formal and informal education, their own and their friends' interaction with doctors, appearance and portrayals of doctors in the media, including advertisements. So what I want to do is what's called a cascade. So I'd like you to each take 60 seconds and type, but don't press enter into the chat window, some common contexts for doctors and describe how those contexts might lead to trust or distrust. So think about how you've encountered the word doctor and how those encounters and the context of those encounters might lead you to trust or distrust doctors. So I'm going to be quiet for 30 seconds, let you type, and then I'll say press enter, and we'll press enter. Okay, press enter. So if you're looking at the chat window, you're seeing an awful lot of entries coming up now. Actually, I'm not, because I can't see everything on my screen at once. I'm going to just show you some of the things that I thought of. So this is Maya Bialik, and she's hawking Nareva, and she begins by saying, "I'm a real scientist." And she's selling this kind of shady thing that's supposed to help with your memory. This is Dr. Sabah. He's hawking anti-aging creams. This is Dr. Oz. So my question is myth and disinformation really the problem with the public not trusting scientists? I submit that's wrong. I submit that it's due the distrust of doctors is a natural and not an intelligence consequence of our training data. For most of us, a large part of what we see about doctors is what erode our trust in them. Okay, so now I want to really quickly talk about transformer architecture. So it's really worthwhile, I think, when you study ChatGPT to look at two languages, your native tongue, your mother tongue. And I think it's important to look at that because you learn that by fast learning. And then it's really worthwhile to look at a second language that you acquire later in life and probably learn with at least more slow learning. And it's worthwhile to look at this. So this is in French, and think about what happens to what something like ChatGPT has to do to figure out what this means. So for example, there are some pronouns and it has to figure out what those pronouns refer to. ChatGPT does an amazing job. Part of the essence of this is directing attention to certain elements. So for example, if you're trying to figure out what the pronoun IL means there, il, you're looking for proper nouns, and there's Napoleon Bonaparte. Great. It's got to look at order, all sorts of things. It's doing an amazing thing. So I'm going to this is just more, since we're running out of time rapidly. So this is a picture from that Ars Technica article. Just look a little bit, it's not a terribly good picture, it's just a start, but think about the word wants, for example. That could be a noun, it could be a verb. You really have to try both alternatives, and you have to look at what's around there to do it. So for example, if you want to know whether wants is a verb, you're looking for a noun, that might be a subject. If you're looking for it to if you think it might be a noun, maybe you're looking for adjectives. For a noun, it might modify. So think of, again, I'm really running out of time here. So I want to do the same thing we did earlier. I want to learn about transformer architecture by probing ChatGPT. So what I'd like you to do, we'll do this at Cascade again. I'd like you to do the same thing I asked ChatGPT to do. Speculate on the meaning of a sentence. The Brindles thunk the Gurns Gartley. With the exception of the word the, all the other words are invented words with no known meaning. Nonetheless, I believe you, either ChatGPT or us as human beings, could speculate on the possible, even probable meanings of this sentence. So go ahead and try. So again, I'm going to ask you to type into the chat room, and then we'll look at, so I'll give you 30 seconds to think about that. Okay, so go ahead and press enter. And here's what ChatGPT did. It's actually pretty interesting. I mean, I guess this will be available soon, so there's not enough time to talk about it. So I'm just going to very quickly close with large language models in 10 words. They both passed their Turing test. Our AI action plan, the slide I began with, and thank you very much. So I'm going to turn this back over to.
Well, thank you. First of all, we have been thanking Frank for blitzing us with lots and lots of ideas here. And are there any questions? I think if you raise your hand, we can respond to that. Or I was thinking about the learning model that we all have as humans. And the song in South Pacific that says you've got to be taught. It's about racism and how your Aunt Maud is a model for something that's good or bad, and you take these attributes in. And one of the Scudam problems was about how little babies understand bad behavior and will respond accordingly to it. So if they see some little baby abusing another little baby, that baby actually will be sensitive and respond to that. So at a very early age, we're able to take in, process, and sometimes recall. So I'm wondering how the human training compares to the AI training, because the AI training is, quote, only limited to what's out on the web, whereas the human training is only limited to human interactions. Any thoughts on that?
I think there are lots of similarities and lots of differences. I think I'm really struck by this example of places like Amazon and Google being able to do these experiments. And they are now, just as a little baby might try and say, and when the mother responds and gets a smile, that helps reinforce the idea that maybe mama is a name. So, it's really, I think we're at a very interesting stage. I think it's going to, so in the same way that Darwin's theories challenged our understanding of how the world came to be the way it is, design as opposed to some sort of a learning happenstance in some sense. I think that artificial intelligence, as we learn more about it, may come to challenge our understanding about what intelligence is, the mental side of us. This is a great time to be alive. It's really interesting to think about some of these things.
Any other reactions, questions? Just speak up then.
I assume you were using ChatGPT. I believe it's the DALL-E tool to make your graphics for the talk.
Yes.
Would it be possible for you to throw a link to the Ars Technica article into the chat?
Sure.
It's also in the abstract that's online at Symbiote Cubes with a direct link as well. So while Frank's
didn't realize that.
That's okay. No, it's fine.
Yeah, the Ars Technica article is good. As I said, that Forbes article is even better. So I highly recommend it. What's interesting is that the Forbes article, so we're trying to make ChatGPT better. And you have the impression maybe from the news that there are a bunch of people trying to make it better. This is a group of people that believe very, very strongly in learning. And they're using essentially, it's learning how to make itself better. And it's really worth reading that article.
If you know Frank is, number one, a deep thinker and is a fast mover. And so I'm wondering, because of this AI revolution, is it causing you to ask more questions about maybe life itself and our human condition? What do you think, Frank?
Me? Oh, definitely. Absolutely. Very definitely. I think it's really, really, really interesting. And, Isaac Asimov is a go-to person for, he's thought about an awful lot. If you want to read a really good article, a really good short story, it's not about artificial intelligence, but it's a short story called Profession. And if you Google Profession by Isaac Asimov, you'll be able to find it on the web. It's really worth reading. I mean, it's a very old story. It's not talking about artificial intelligence at all. But the fundamental idea here is that what all these things are doing is based on the data they're fed. And they can't go beyond that what they're fed. And that's essentially the essence of Asimov's story. But it's a good story. It's a great read.
So one other question, where do we go to find things? Do we go to Google? Do we go to ChatGPT? Or if we're mercenary, do we just go to Amazon? But I mean, seriously, where do we go to learn things? I haven't used AI as much, so I tend to look up things in Google. But apparently I can ask ChatGPT to look up things and do even more. Are you moving between places to search for knowledge? I mean, we're all beyond the card catalog, right? So where are you moving?
So I always use ChatGPT now, almost always. I mean, it's a good thing to get started. It gives you this very wide-ranging view. It's very, very good at some things, but it's very limited. A lot of it is so we're learning more and more about how to craft our probes. I mean, there's a whole new job category of people that are, I think what they call themselves, not probe engineers or something. There's a name. There's a new, it's basically
Prompt.
Excuse me?
Prompt.
Prompt engineers.
Okay.
So that's you really have to learn how to do that. It's just the same thing is true with Google. In the old days, you had to know what to search for in Google. I mean, it's interesting. Google is nowhere near as useful as it used to be. And that's for lots of reasons. But you need to talk to lots of people. It's the same things we've always done. I think ChatGPT adds another tool, but it's only one of many.
Okay, we really need to call this to a halt. We have another time for discussion. And parallel to that, we have an opportunity, if you're interested, to discuss the proverbial, how do we address skills versus modeling? And maybe you should add deep thinking as well in a modeling course. But Anna, our student associate, is going to be facilitating the discussion in the other room about the skills versus modeling. We're going to leave this room, and if you go to your sessions, you'll see the discussion on AI with Frank. And if you're like me, you still have a lot of questions, and now's the time to say goodbye here. Thank Frank at this point, and we'll see you on the other side in the next room. Take care.
Super, thank you.
Thank you.